Definitely, we want all the books sold. That is what we want. Okay, so I remember 5 years ago, I was here. Actually, I was here, but also I was in a little coffee shop over there, up the hill a bit, and I was meeting with Paisley Reckdahl. I was in her workshop, and we were doing a manuscript consultation. Back then, you could send 25 pages of prose. I just found the file I sent her, and I'm kind of amazed at how many episodes from that ended up in this book. So 5 years, this could be you. So this is a memoir about my relationship and marriage to my spouse, who now is known as Venus de Mars and is legally a woman. But we got married in 1983. She started coming out as trans in 1988, and it was a very different world. And so this is kind of reflecting that. And I'm just going to read you a couple of passages for some of that flavor. So the first section takes place in 1973 in Duluth, and we are in 8th grade. I first met Steve Grandell, the person I would fall in love with and marry, in 8th grade. We signed up for the same elective, a mass media class taught by Mrs. Delisle. The class wasn't quite what I wanted. I'd expected to take journalism, but the teacher who taught it previously, my English teacher in 7th grade, had left. I felt betrayed. There was something in Miss Brown's demeanor, her long brownish blonde hair and brainy wire-rimmed glasses, a down-to-earth seriousness that made me feel as if she understood me. Or maybe I've got that the wrong way around. I felt I could see myself in her. But now there was no Miss Brown, no journalism class. Mass media became the closest substitute. I remember being fascinated by the discrepancy between the spelling and pronunciation of this new teacher's name, Delisle. It looked like Delisley. I loved the sounds of words and the anomalies of language, how a word could be spelled one way but sound completely different, and how sometimes color was spelled color with a U. I paid attention to the unusual, the exception to the rule. And perhaps that's what made me notice someone 2 rows over who would later be known as Venus de Mars. I have to pause here to say something about names. The person I married, who I am still very much in love with, is now legally named Venus de Mars. Venus now goes by she and her pronouns, but a large portion of our journey together took place at a time when she was known as Steve. Even when things began to shift for reasons that will be explained, I continued to think of my spouse as Steve, or Sweetie, or Bug. The name Venus came much later, and even then I was slow to recognize that's what she wanted me to call her. I'm not proud of myself for that, but that's what the story is. So just a couple more sections. So we finally start dating after I've graduated from college. We get married in 1988, and she starts coming out as transgender to me, but we didn't, trans was a word that existed then, but she called herself a cross-dresser because she wasn't prepared to do the total switch. I think nowadays we would say non-binary. So I'll just read a couple of paragraphs here, and this is 1989. A few friends I told about his cross-dressing didn't help. They didn't understand why I wanted to stay with him. It feels weird to say him for Venus now, doesn't it? It's better if you read this, page by page. Okay, anyway. It made me feel isolated. Steve was looking more androgynous, with shoulder-length hair, sometimes wearing women's pants and blazers for dress-up occasions. To me, the changes were gradual, and he looked like the same person I'd married. Others saw a sharp difference. And he pushed for more. We started going to the Gay 90s, a huge gay bar in downtown Minneapolis where he could dress as a woman. I liked it there because the clientele was fun and no one wanted to hit on me. My favorite place was the piano bar, where Lori Dawkins sat at a grand piano, greeting everyone in a way that made them feel not just welcome, but like a cherished member of the family. I also liked the drag shows. I'd read notes on camp, and I viewed drag as a form of social critique. But the constant focus on how Steve grappled with expressing who he was, the constant going out, began to feel exhausting. By the way, I was in graduate school at this time and teaching freshman composition. Worrying about his depression didn't stop my own need to breathe, and it felt like he was taking up all the available oxygen. Here's the thing, Steve's gender issues called into question my own identity. At first, I saw it in binary terms. If he was a woman, was I not enough of a woman? Was there something deficient with me? I questioned whether I was pretty enough, sexy enough, and even when I knew logically that my womanhood wasn't the point, it was as if he had tipped the scale one way and I needed to scramble to balance out the other side. I wasn't male and I didn't want to look male, and the one time I'd cut my hair short in junior high, I'd regretted it. But I didn't feel comfortable being labeled female either. It felt limiting. When I was 4 or 5 years old, my sister Carolyn asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I replied without hesitation that I wanted to be a boy. I knew as I said it that I didn't literally want to be a boy and grow up to be a man, but I wanted to do all the adventurous things that boys could do. Peter Rabbit was the one who had the adventure, not Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail. So, full steam ahead. This is about 10 years later, 1998, and Venus is still known as Steve and has started a band called All the Pretty Horses. And they decide to go to New York City to see if that will bring them more respect back in Minneapolis. It's kind of convoluted, but it worked. Okay. And also we end up finding our way back to each other through art. So this is part of that. Would I have chosen to get married if I'd known the difficult path ahead? I don't know. What I do know is that from the very beginning, I chose a life of art shared with a kindred soul. When the trouble started and Steve's evolving identity was only part of the trouble, art was what often beckoned me back to our relationship, feeding my hunger for something bigger than myself, something bigger than the both of us. I searched for places where we could be our authentic selves, places that rescued us like an ark in floodwaters, places that welcomed a pair of misfits who loved each other. One of those spots turned out to be a hotel in New York City. We arrived in a summer chorus of jackhammers. Steve and I, with 3 other band members, Jandine, Leanne, and Tiffany, we paused on the sidewalk, a busy sidewalk off of 3rd Avenue, guarding a pile of amps, guitars, and suitcases, hoping the cabs had dropped us off in the right place. Initially, it didn't look like they had. Construction scaffolding and a plywood fence jutted onto the sidewalk where the hotel should have been. But then I realized someone had painted the 4x8 sections of fence with the hotel's name and large cartoonish figures. One depicted a man with an outsized head wearing some kind of a green uniform, a cap, and a bow tie. A doorman? Next to it was a familiar green H inside a forbidding square and backslash no symbol. A not the Holiday Inn warning. Well, the guidebook hadn't pitched it as a standard hotel. I felt the band members' eyes on me, ready for a screw up. I had booked this hotel, that's why they're looking at me. This lineup had begun to make me feel like an outsider. I couldn't put my finger on the reason, so I just tried to power through it. But in the context of the band, sometimes even Steve made me feel like an outsider. The band gave him more confidence, which allowed him to take it to new, much photographed extremes, and his usual stage look was a corset, fishnets, and stiletto thigh highs. I didn't fit visually with the other band members either. They were all tall and gender ambiguous, and their appearance by day evoked their stage look. When they walked down the sidewalk, heads turned. In contrast, I was too short and chunky to feel attractive in goth punk clothes. I was allergic to most makeup, and my hair needed to look reasonable for my day job. At least that was my internal script. I could have, if there had been a band called the June Cleavers, I could have easily dressed to match it. Okay, so then we do find the way inside the hotel and we start going up the stairs and there's all this artwork painted on the walls. Some film noir silhouettes of a man and a woman, another painting of a crime scene outline, still another of a life-sized man pointing a revolver, something like Andy Warhol's double Elvis picture. More murals all the way up the stairs. And when we got to the diminutive lobby, we could see that an aquarium bubbled away in the empty shell of an old RCA Victor television cabinet. Near the ceiling, someone had painted a faux medieval frieze and timbering. On an alcove to my left, a small gold-painted Buddha sat serenely on the ledge. The narrow stairs continued their tight ascent to more floors and what looked like graffiti on the walls. Graffiti art, I should say. Turning, I gazed down a long hallway with similar colors and textures. The place mesmerized me. Everything was art as far as I could see. I felt a secret shudder of joy as I looked around in wonder at the avalanche of expression we had walked into that now surrounded us. The walls were not a smooth canvas. Bulges, scrapes, and damaged trim abounded, and I liked that. I already knew what art cars were, cars that had gotten so rusted and beat up that the artists who owned them said, screw it, and turned them into artistic expression on wheels. We'd already done that with 2 of our cars. Now I was inside a hotel where the same thing had happened, large scale. I was inside an art hotel. There was a door off the lobby open for luggage storage, and on the wall, someone had painted another pulp fiction style woman in a fedora and trench coat leaning against the side of a brick building. Above her, a slogan blazed, "Live fast, die young." My shiver of joy settled into something more solid. I knew immediately that I was in my second home. Thank you.